Progress.
Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me? I got 3 people on here. So today is the first day of Buyer 101. A couple of you have gone through this before, but it's basically just my advice on how to work with buyers. Our first day, this is a mock home buying presentation. This is something that I developed during COVID because obviously it was a little weird in the beginning and we couldn't really be in touch with people. And I just discovered it's a really nice way to reach people that you don't have to like have the whole training room booked. Of course, that's ideal for a home buyer seminar, but doing it over Zoom is only an asset because you can reach more people. People don't have to leave their houses, more people are available. So this is something that I would normally do with an attorney and a lender. As Frank can attest, last time I did this, I had an attorney and a lender with me. Moving forward, I would like to have that. They're not always available though. They're busy. So we're gonna get started. Let me see here. Oh, Ashley. So I'm gonna talk to you as if you were my buyers. Hi, how are you? My name is Sarah. I've been doing real estate for 7 years. I started with my parents over at Lair, and now I'm at Keller Williams. I started selling in 2015, and now I am currently the productivity coach for the business development program. And then I would introduce Matt. This is Matt. He's a great lender I've worked with in the past. Matt, introduce yourself. Da, 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 da. Matt would introduce himself. And then I would introduce Attorney Popolo. He would say a few words about himself. This is where I want to touch on. It's very important to build out your network. So being in real estate isn't just chasing buyers and sellers, it's chasing allied resources who are people that are going to push you business and you push them business. It's like a, not tug of war is not the right. Either way, you're helping them. You scratch their back, they scratch yours. So these are people that I've developed in my network. In time, you want to have enough people to where, like, if Matt and Tony aren't available, I have another attorney and another lender. And this is going to be important because as much as real estate is, it's transactional, but it's also very much based on relationships, and not everyone's going to get along. I might refer Tony to a client that they're like, I don't like Tony. And you want to be able to provide them something else. Again, as I reiterate in our coaching, you want to be a resource to people for more than just real estate. You want to be there for anything that they need, an attorney, a lender, a contractor, anything. So this is how I introduce myself in my home buyer seminar. This is also something that I developed on my own. I can send you guys it so you can kind of use it as a copy, or you can make your own. We'll work on making one as part of the business development program if you're a part of that program. So before we get started, these are disclosures explaining the differences between the types of agency. When I do this, I set up an Eventbrite link, and it requires them to give me all of their information. Eventbrite. So it's like sometimes we have classes in here when we're going to run lunch, we'll have Eventbrite so we can have a solid number of people we know are coming. Having that makes them give you the information to attend, and then you have it for your database. So you can push them in your database. And even if they don't come to this, they signed up and you have their information so you can pursue them. I usually email this to them ahead of time because any conversation you have with somebody about real estate, you need to present these. I'm licensed in both New Hampshire and Mass, so this is going to cover both New Hampshire and Mass, but I'm going to try and keep my emphasis on Massachusetts process. Does everyone here know what these are? Do you have any questions about what these are? You know what they are. 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 That's totally fine, girl. It's fine. This is a place that's safe to be vulnerable. So these are mass disclosures. So when you have a client and you need to talk to them essentially about anything, this should be the first conversation you're having with them. It's discussing the different types of agencies in Massachusetts, whether it's a seller's agent, a buyer's agent, a solicitor, a designated buyer seller agent, which is what you would want to be, and dual agency, which I don't recommend. But you want to present this to them. This is a nice way to have a conversation with them about the difference between a customer and a client. I usually say right now, all of you are customers unless you're a client of mine already. If you want to hire me to help you hit your real estate goals, I just need to give you one of these and I'll send you over a buyer agency contract as well. And then you have them under contract for X number of months or whatever it is that you do. Everyone's different, and I highly recommend being flexible with that buyer agency contract, but we'll kind of get there. So the first step in selling real estate is always talk to a lender. Anyone that comes to you, they're usually going to come to you because if you've never bought or sold a home before, you don't know. And even if you have, you don't know because things change. If you bought your house back in the 70s and are selling it now because you're retiring and moving to Florida or you just don't want it anymore, the process looks entirely different. There were no buyer's agents back then. So this is something that in the lending process was entirely different. Back in 2005, it was completely different than what it is now. So the first step is always going to be to talk with a lender because without it, you don't know your budget and it's difficult to look at the inventory. If you have someone that says, hey, I want to buy a house, Brian, and you say, okay, cool, send me what you're interested in. And they're sending you $500,000 homes and you're like, oh, wait, you have to talk to a lender and they're only pre-approved for $350,000. that's going to make for some serious disappointment, and they're going to get discouraged in a market that's already kind of discouraging. So it's most important that you connect them to a lender as soon as possible. And all of your messaging should be that, you know, like, hey, talk to a lender first. I can connect you to a bunch of great ones, you know, and that's where your allied resources come in handy, because they should be sharing stuff about you. Hey, you need a realtor, you know, that's great, period. So this is what I would review with them. Talk with a lender. The details of what you're pre-approved for make a huge difference in what your inventory is available for your particular situation. Certain types of loans have certain types of requirements, and in this very competitive market, you want to be fully prepared to make an offer when you find something you like. This is also because a lot of people don't know the restrictions on different loans. A VA loan has different restrictions than an FHA loan, than a conventional loan, and then a USDA loan. So these are all things that they would never know. And this is why you're a resource to them, and this is what you want to show them. That I'm more than just me hooking you up and having you look on Zillow and showing you houses. I know about the industry, and I'm going to set you up for long-term success. So I discussed what a pre-approval is, because again, people are unaware of the process. So I explained to them that it's very important to get a credit report. This is also from the lender. So sorry, I want to kind of reel it back a minute. I send all of my slides when I created this to my lender and my attorney, and I said, please add what you would like. So this would be where I would kind of do like a quick difference, but I would really let them explain, because this is really their ball field. This is not what we should be discussing. You want to know to stay in your lane. I say that like a ton of times because it's very important. You don't know the mortgage process like they know the mortgage process. So this is something that I would let them touch on, because they could go into this conventional versus FHA. FHA allows for a 3.5% for 1 to 4 family homes. It's more lenient with credit scores, the debt to income ratios. I can't tell them what the debt to income ratio is. I don't know. You know what I mean? I can't tell them what specific credit scores. I might have an idea, but they change. Like just in 2020 alone, I think they changed like 3 times because of COVID. So these are things that you want to make sure you have a lender for. Pre-qual versus pre-approval. Does anyone know what the difference is? Just so I can explain it to you in case you don't. No, you don't. Okay, so pre-qualification, it certifies that they've obtained a credit report and reviewed your income. But a pre-approval is gonna make your buyer's odds of their offer being accepted higher, especially when they're competing against people with cash or higher down payments, because when they're pre-approved, they're fully vetted.
The pre-approval is not a commitment.
Not a commitment, very different. So the pre-approval is basically when I ask, so specifically Donna Weinberg over at Bay Equity, I'll say, Donna, these people want to buy something and they want to be as competitive as possible. Can you please have them approved? And she'll fully approve them for me, which is not quite a pre-approval. It's a step further. Not all lenders will do that, but it's just going a step further to make sure they're vetted. Ooh.
Does it bring down your credit every time they do it?
No, so you have 30 days. It's my understanding that you have 30 days. So if you're shopping around for like a lender, tell them to do it all within 30 days. Because if you do one every month and they see a hit every month, that's when it affects your credit. But if they talk to 4 lenders in a week, it's going to be okay. They're shopping around for a mortgage.
And it lasts about 3 months.
Yeah, it can last, and even in a good lender will stay on top of it. And that should be something that you're also on top of. If you know, oh, okay, like they took a break, like for instance, I had clients that took a break for July. They were burnt out. It's normal in this market to have buyers be burnt out. They came back in August and we already have them under contract, but I knew I had to reach out to Donna to say, hey, they stopped for a month. Could you just reissue and make sure that everything's all set? It was only a month, but so it's really not necessary. But some people stop for 6 months. Some people stop for a year. And these are all things that you just want to kind of stay on top of. But the main difference is that a pre-approval just goes a little bit further. Again, here it says it takes 2 to 3 days. This was Matt McDonald. So at Premier, they're able to get it the same day because they obtain all of your documents. That's becoming more normal, I'm finding, because lenders are competing with cash just like buyers are competing with cash, because if it's only cash buyers out there, the lenders aren't making any money. So they want to make our job easier. So this particular company will take all of their documentation as a requirement up front, and then they're approved. And then it's really only, or not. And then they know what they have to work on, which is great, because you can have a pre-qual, have someone under contract, and then they dig a little bit deeper and the deal's not going to come together. And it's just emotionally very stressful over an emotion, like it's an emotional process to begin with. So my advice would be to get you a lender that is willing to kind of go the extra mile and do the full approval, because then it's really only contingent on the property and title work. It's not your buyers are vetted, their job's good, pending anything disastrous happening, like them losing their jobs or whatever, they're good to go. It really just depends on the property. And when you're on the selling side of things, this is buyer 101, you want to look out for this too. You want to know the difference, because it's like if you have one buyer candidate that's stronger than the other, that's what you want to be paying attention to.
So the pre-approval is for the person, but the commitment is for the property.
So bank commitment comes after that's all vetted. So you need to,
That's associated with a specific property.
yes,
In other words.
because
yeah,
because if they've done the,
I'm gonna buy this, so now I'm gonna make a commitment.
because the bank commitment is them saying, okay, we feel comfortable lending you this money. We've committed to giving you this money. And then
For
there's
this
the clear to
property.
close beyond that.
So if you get a commitment and then you change properties, you gotta. get
You
another
can't
commitment.
get, they won't give you a bank commitment. They won't give you a bank commitment unless you're under contract on a property,
Okay.
because they can't. Like, how can they? What if you find a house that's fallen down? You know what I mean? So these are things where that appraisal would need to be done so that they know the value is worth what they're lending. And they just need to make sure that basically the property is vetted. So that is different than a clear to close. So there's commitment, and commitment is your financing deadline. And that is the most important deadline to be paying attention to. If you need help paying attention to it because you're so busy, that's great. Get a transaction coordinator, because if you mess that up, that's when you'll be sued, because you're losing people's money.
So you get, so you have pre-approval, commitment, and then clear close. Those
Come in.
are three separate.
Yeah, those are three
Milestones.
separate things. So your pre-qual would be like, okay, I'm kicking around, I'm tire shopping, I'm getting a pre-qual. I gave you my credit score, I gave you a couple bank statements, great, got it. I can go look at a house now because I have a general idea of what I can afford. A pre-approval is taking it to the next level. It's saying, okay, I know I can afford this. I'm not just like kind of sure, I know I can afford this. This is for sure my budget. When you go over to a commitment, that means they've vetted the property, they've done most of the title work, they've done the appraisal, and the bank is saying, word, here you go, have this money. Clear to close is saying, we're good to go. We're good to close. All the title work's
How
wrapped
long
up.
does clear close?
The clear to close needs to go out 3 days prior. And we're gonna hit this. We're getting ahead. We're gonna hit this. But it has to go out 3 days. So before the closing. So if you were to, like, for instance, the clear to close on a transaction I just did an extension for last week, we couldn't clear to close because the appraiser is not done. So the commitment's not done. So the financing deadline needs to move, and that means the closing needs to move, because there's no way that that's going to be done in time. And if the clear to close, they say like, okay, we're hitting a hiccup, a title issue popped up and we're not good to go. Code red, not good to go, gonna need an extra week, then we need to push the closing, because the TRID law requires 3 days. And what that means is that basically there's a closing disclosure and it has all of the money listed on the buyer and seller side, what's going out, what's coming in, and they need 3 days legally to review that. That's where that comes into play, because they can't be like, okay, we looked at this, let's close right now. They want you to have time. There needs to be a legal requirement for them to know and understand what they're doing. So that's the pre-approval. And after they get their pre-approval or their pre-qual, can you tell I did this during COVID? Then we're gonna go look at houses. So once they're pre-qualified by a lender, it's easier to look at a house despite the COVID pandemic. The market is still very busy. What the virus has changed is how homes are shown. This is obviously something that you want to tweak and something that you want to be looking at. Obviously the COVID is kind of over, but not really. So, but I don't know. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind. I would probably take this out now and just talk about, what to be looking for, stuff like that. But that's when they can start their home search. So this is, okay, we've searched, we found a home. The next step, can I move this down here? Oh yeah, cool. So the next step would be to make an offer. So you've shown them a bunch of homes, they're happy, cool, want an offer. Also, I would like to add, because this is not for buyers, this is for you guys. If you've shown somebody 10 homes and they're like not showing any interest in putting an offer in, know that your time is valuable and you don't get paid for going and showing homes. You get paid for closings. So if you feel like someone's wasting your time, be aware of that. And if you're in the business development program out, you can obviously come to me and be like, I was on the person, 10 houses and nothing's happening, and I'll give you my 2 cents. But you want to just be mindful of that, because it's, oh yeah, it did.
What are some common red flags that somebody's facing?
Well, like it's usually so again, and I can't stress this enough, like you're a psychologist when you're a realtor. So when like I can give you a prime example. So I worked with this client that was referred to me from a lender. And this was when I was on my parents' team. So I think it might have been like a referral from them. And it was a mom and son. And the son super wanted the mom to buy something. He was like so gung ho about it. We're going to look at houses. Great, great, great. It's obvious this woman is not interested. Like you can just read it on her. She's like, yeah, great. I'm appeasing my kid. I'm going to look at these houses. After a certain amount of time, they start squabbling. If you see them arguing, it's kind of an idea to be like, you know what? Maybe you can come to my office and we can have a discussion about what exactly you're looking for. And if we can't come to a conclusion, then we're gonna pump the brakes and I'm gonna have you go through some open houses. Oh, I'm really hoping I don't unplug this. We're gonna go look at some open houses is what I would suggest. So if you see any sort of like relational dispute between the people that are buying, that can be a red flag. If they're like, if they're nitpicking everything in a home, you want to make it clear to them there's always going to be something with a home. It's just like a person. No one's all good. There's no home that's 100% good. They depreciate. It's part of being a homeowner is maintenance. And there are some people that you just know have unrealistic expectations. And sometimes they need to get shot down a few times. And so if they're putting offers in, I might entertain them for a little while. And then if they don't learn their lesson, then I'm kind of like, all right, go to some open houses. But you'll learn. I don't really know how to like give you a real clear answer. You'll just know that there's friction there and you'll feel it just like anyone else. Like you pick up on vibes when you're with your friends. It's the same thing. You're picking up on the vibe. That's like, I don't know if they actually want to buy something. And usually like if they're nitpicking, you want to keep reiterating to them, like, this isn't a huge deal. Like termites, that might send somebody like this house had termites. It's going to fall down. I know, because I've been in so many homes, that termites are very common. And once they're treated, they're fine. You have a treatment system, totally good. Obviously, whatever damage is done needs to be fixed. But there are things like that where if they let small things trigger them and they're kind of like out of whack because of that, you might want to reconsider. You can fire your clients just like they can fire you, and I don't ever recommend that. I always try to make it work for my clients because it is a highly emotional process. So in time, you'll learn the difference between emotional because this is stressful and emotional because I don't want to do this. It'll be pretty clear, but it'll take some kind of trial and error. Yeah. No. How long have you known this buyer? Not long. Okay. So so tire kicking, I feel like is normal in that beginning process. So I would just I like to go to the first showing with them. I like to go and I like to say, or set up a meeting here. This is why you have this space. What if they didn't want to go to showing? They don't want to go to showing? Don't spend time with them. Then don't spend your time with them, but add them to your database and work them long-term. Not every referral you get is like okay, in 30 days, I'm going to get a check. Sometimes they're like, and because I recommend people talk to a lender a year before they buy. Because what if your credit took a hit, or what if you can't afford where you want to live and you want to take the time to build that up. So just like that, you might not get them right now, but in a year from now, they might buy $1 million property. So keep them in your database. And I don't know if you're in the business development program, but if you are, we go over kind of like how to add them and how to continue to touch them in a way that's not overwhelming, but we'll keep them top of mind. It's always your goal to check in. I would say quarterly, call them and say, hey, I just want to check in, see how everything's going. No pressure here. I just like to do check-ins with my clients. If you need anything, let me know. I've gotten resistance from that where people are like, yeah, I'm fine. All right, bye. Or I get like, oh my God, thanks so much. You called me. So you can't please everybody, but if you're going and they won't go look at a house, don't chase them. And it's hard when you're in the beginning because you're like, I just want to close a deal, but protect your time because it could be much better spent doing lead gen and other things. Yeah, and that's perfect. No, that's perfect. Check in with them once a week for a month. And then after that month, check in with them every other week. And then, quarterly from there. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I mean. In the database, so in Command, there's smart plans, and that's what I mean. You can find ways to nurture them that aren't in your face. Even just sending an email. I have people that are like, oh my God, I got your email at 6:30 a.m. this morning. And I'm like, that's hilarious. I didn't send an email, but they're on a smart plan. So it looks like I'm doing a lot more than I actually am because we have the Command platform to leverage. So that's something I would also do. You got a question for me? I see your question face.
Do smart plans tell you that they've sent an email?
Yeah. Yes, so if you view them,
Because I had emails going out and I never knew if they were out.
so if you view the contacts, and we'll go over this, and we can go over it separately. We'll go through and you can view, well, either way, you can view that it was sent. It can be glitchy at times and you want to just take note of that so that you know, and if you can fix it, you can fix it, but we'll go over that. So it's offer time, you show them a house, they're super happy about it, they want it. So I'm going to discuss the difference between a contract to purchase and a purchase and sales agreement. Again, I have New Hampshire in here. I don't know if anyone has a New Hampshire license in here. Are you going to get yours?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I'll go over it. So I know. So in Mass, buyers submit a contract to purchase, and if it's accepted after the home inspection, buyer and seller are able to come to terms, and a purchase and sales is written by the buyer and seller's attorneys. So in Mass, if any of you have put any deals together, if not, no big deal. A contract to purchase is like a bid. It's like your offer, like, hey, I'm gonna do this, great. And it gets you through the end of the home inspection period, and then two attorneys get together, one representing the seller, one representing the bank, and then they put together a purchase and sales that both parties are comfortable with. Once that's put together, it's in Mass, it's like you really just are there for support. The attorneys really kind of run the show, because if there's any issue with that purchase and sale, it may come from you to say, hey, my client's concerned about this, but you're going to have to connect them to their attorney. And this is where it's really important to know your role. Don't overstep on an attorney, because we have a real estate license. We don't have a bar license. So they're going to know more. And there might be times where that's frustrating, because maybe they're not the best attorney. You don't always get a choice of the attorney you're working with, but you really have to be careful, because you don't want to be overbearing. The attorney is there for the purchase and sales agreement. We're here for support. Attorneys everyone's different. Some attorney might say, I got this, stay away. And some attorneys might say, hey, this is an issue. Can you figure it out and let me know what they want? So that's just where you kind of got to feel it out. But in Mass, once you do your contract to purchase, if it's accepted, it moves on to purchase and sales after home inspection. And that's something that the attorneys handle, would be the purchase and sales agreement.
What if they waive inspection?
If they waive inspection, then it's really just, it can go, what we would say is, oh, it's going right to P&S. So maybe we get the first deposit, and then however long the attorneys can fit in, like say it's usually done within a week. So if the attorneys, it really depends on the attorney schedule. Because at that point, on the buyer side, you're saying, hey, my offer got accepted. Here, Donna, here's my contract to purchase fully executed. And that's when she triggers the closing attorney. She's going to say, hey, I'm picking this person, or she'll go to the realtor. Like if you work with them for a while, like she knows certain ones that I like and certain ones I'm not crazy about. So she'll say, hey, Sarah, who do you want to be the closing attorney? Or she'll just pick it herself, and then they connect with you. But that obviously, they're people, they're busy. We're not the only home they're selling. So it can take some time just to get the two attorneys to coordinate. Once they're coordinated, it's signed. There's really no, normally it would be 10 to 12 days, but it's usually within a week if there's no home inspection. That's becoming less and less normal though. So as it is very hard, because you want to get your clients under contract, and you want them to be happy, and you want them to buy something because they're eager. However, there's a difference between buying something, out of the emotional process. You're supposed to be the anchor, like if there's like a rock and a balloon, you let them be the balloon and you're the rock. So as much as they might want to waive their home inspection, I really do not ever recommend it. My clients have to be super adamant about that. If they're like, I want this house, I don't care, great. That's why we're seeing all these addendums come through these brokerages that are saying, hey, I'm giving you this to let you know that if you choose to waive this, I'm not liable. I didn't tell you to do that. Because we're seeing more people get sued. As we learned during our inspection class, I think it was like last month, the only person that's on the hook if something goes wrong from that is us, is the realtor. So you want to talk about getting sued? That's a sure way that it could potentially get you sued. So hold on just a second, I'm sorry. Sorry. So this is an inspection issue, shockingly enough. But I just wouldn't recommend it, especially where the market is looking like it's a little less insane. It's still super busy, but I've been able to get my last 3 deals under contract with intact contingencies at asking. So things are starting to become more normal, which is great, because when you're new, you're usually buyer heavy. And that's just something that I digress. I do that a lot. I have ADHD. I'll go ramble. So I try to put myself back. But in New Hampshire, for Matt, it goes right to purchase and sales. There is no contract to purchase. I'm sure you're familiar with that because I think your mom has her
Yeah.
license. So it goes right to purchase and sales. There's very limited attorney involvement. A lot of agents are a little bit nervous about practicing in New Hampshire because you are more vulnerable to being sued because there is no attorney involvement. And if you ask an attorney, they're like, meh, that's for you to deal with. They do the title work, they do the deed, and that's really it. And so you're on your own, but it is simpler and usually moves faster. I prefer it, but I understand why there's a lot more risk. Frank, non-New Hampshire guy, not for you. You'd not like it. Just because you're writing the purchase and sales agreement. So you're teetering on the practicing law line. It's a boilerplate contract. You're just filling in the blanks. But when it comes to addendums, that's why we have Debbie or whoever you have as a mentor. But basically you want to make sure that you're not going too far with the addendum language in New Hampshire. But I don't want to get too deep into New Hampshire because not everyone's about it. So the timeline, deposits, offer price, and special requests. This is important to go over with your clients because when you set their expectations appropriately, it makes your job easier. If they're going in blind, they're going to be calling you every day, all day, and you're going to want to rip all your hair out. So it's important, and why I like these presentations so much is that it gives them a clear and map of what their process is going to look like. So the contract to purchase and sales agreement are initially submitted, and it clearly lays out a ton of information. It's laying out the amount you're offering to pay, what your down payment and what increments it's being dispersed, your home inspection window, your purchase and sales due date, if it's in Mass, and what type of loan you have, what type of financing contingencies you have, who's the escrow agent holding the deposits, and any special requests. So if you have closing costs, personal property included, appraisal limits, if over asking, etc. So for instance, an appraisal limit might be like, okay, my client is willing to pay $10,000 over the appraised value up to a certain dollar amount, whatever. So that's just something that would be different. Do you guys have any questions about the timeline at all? Nothing. Okay, cool. It's just important that you know to explain to your clients again, because setting the expectation is going to make your job a lot easier. Not everyone listens, but you can say you told them so, which is always nice. So how to be a competitive buyer. I like to talk about this because it's a competitive market. You want to look, I always advise my buyers, and I would suggest you advise your buyers as well, to look well below the top of their budget, because prices are super inflated and you're having to compete. If you're competing and you're looking at a home that's worth, $420, and you know that the top of your budget is $425 and there's 8 offers, the likelihood of your client getting that is unlikely, because there's probably going to be people that are going $10, $20, $30,000 over, waiving their home inspection, waiving their appraisal. If they're a financed buyer, they can't waive their appraisal. If they do, they're screwed. So those are just things that you want to take into consideration and have them shop below their budget. An escalation clause instead of a bidding war where acceptable. Not every agent is comfortable accepting an escalation clause. I don't know why, to be completely honest. I think that they're a nice way to protect your buyer and give the seller what they want. So does anyone here know what an escalation clause is? So an escalation clause, we have different formats too, like contingencies that you guys can copy so you don't have to come up with your own language. It's basically saying, okay, this house is on, again, we'll just stick with the same numbers for $415. My client is willing to pay, my client's offering $415, but they're also willing to pay $1,000 over the highest offer up to $450. So that's kind of eliminating, what if, I've been in a situation where someone's given me an over asking offer with no inspection and I had no other offers, but they didn't know that. So they way overpaid for the house. So for me, as a buyer agent, you want to keep that in mind. Sometimes they might be busy, but all the feedback is negative because there's a shortage on housing. So not every busy open house leads to a ton of offers. And so that's just why I like to use the escalation clause, especially if I feel like, I don't know about this one. The value isn't really there, but my clients really want it. This is what I'm going to suggest them. Do your best to be available for showing sooner rather than later. This is just for buyers, and it's easing up a little bit because it's fall, but in the spring and summer, if they see a house that they want, don't wait a week to go see it. It's going to go away. So it's going to be under contract as soon as possible. You want to try and get in for the open house. If you can get in sooner than the open house, great. If it's showings only, you want to try and get in just as soon as possible. If they don't like it, great. If not, then it's fine. That's fine too. Hi.
When's the best time to buy?
The best time to buy, honestly, anytime. You know I'm in sales. Anytime's the best time to buy.
Now,
So the best time to buy, realistically, it depends, it's person to person. Like, how much money do you have? How much are you putting down? What are your bills like? To me, it's never a bad time to invest in real estate because long-term, real estate always goes up. Like, there's certain stocks you buy because they're only growing, and that even if they take a hit, they're always on their way back up. When my grandparents bought their house in 1975, they bought it for 30 grand and then they sold it to me for 200,000. That's a huge return on their investment, no? So yeah, it might be inflated prices, but I always, and you want to keep this in mind though, because I will tell my clients, I don't think you should buy this house if they like it and it's way overpriced, because if I know that this is a starter home for them and they're gonna want to move, they're gonna grow out of it fast, small house, and where you're buying at this peak of this market, you're lucky if you may break even in a buyer's market. And I want you to use me when I list your house. So the conversation I have is, this house is great, but if you buy it, I'd recommend staying until the next seller's market, which is probably about 10 to 12 years away. So if you can commit to 10 to 12 years, barring anything catastrophic happening, sure, let's do it. But if not, I don't recommend it, because if you come to me in 5 years and ask me to sell this house, I don't know if I'll be able to get you what you're paying now. And I like to have those honest conversations with my clients because I want them coming back to me. And you want to always be thinking about the long game. So to me, it's always a good time to buy, but it's also depends on their personal situation. The best time I always get deals for my clients would be in the fall and winter. So like last winter, for instance, I put a deal under contract in Bedford, New Hampshire, which is a very affluent area. And we put it under for 480 and the appraisal came back at 530. So they started with 50 G's in equity. And they've only added, and I get to sell it again. It's coming around the market if you don't even look to move to Bedford. So I find that properties that are for sale in the fall and winter are people that have to move, not people that want to move. You're not going to move during Christmas time. You're not going to move during school season unless you're in a situation where you have to move, whether it's for work, financial situation, you want to kill your wife, divorce, someone died, I don't know, like there could be a plethora of reasons why you're doing it, but it's because you got to and not because you want to. Because if you wanted to move and you were talking to your realtor, they would say, we should wait for the spring market. Now it might be a little bit different because we're so teetering on like, okay, is this going to flip? Is this not going to flip? When's it going to flip? That I feel like everyone's just like, all right, I'm selling my house while I can. But if we were living in normal life, usually fall and winter, you can get a deal. And this was last 2020 fall and winter. So it is still an insane market, but this is when you can get the deals because sellers can't be as picky. There's also significantly less buyers looking for the same reason why there's significantly less homes for sale. People got their kids in school, they got Christmas coming up. They're not looking to do any of that. Do your best not to get discouraged. The market climate can change at any time. This was obviously back in 2020 and it's still peaking, but it seems to be kind of evening out a little bit. Understand that homes are usually priced taking depreciation into account as well as repairs needed. Know going into your search that the housing market has only gone up in price since COVID started. I put that because when COVID first hit, people were like, oh, I'm gonna get a deal on homes. No, there was less properties for sale. The interest rates were still super low. I think they lowered even more during COVID and it created a frenzy, as we know now. I like to also point out to them that homes are usually priced taking depreciation into account because sometimes people will be like, oh, I saw a crack in the foundation and the heating system is old, but these are all things like you looked at it, you saw it was old, they priced it accordingly. Like I'm not going to price a house that was built in 1965 the way I'm going to price a house that's built in 2019. So you want to explain that to them, that this listing agent is doing their due diligence and you can check it. Like I always check before I submit an offer. If I think it's overpriced, I'll tell them. And those are the ones you want to be targeting too, by the way, because they don't get offers. So that's just something I always want to keep in mind, because when I explain this to them and then I go back to your, when do you drop a buyer or when do you stop going with them? If they're going around and I've already explained to them, like this home is priced with the depreciation in mind and they're just walking around complaining about the depreciation in the home. After about 3 times of that, I'm like, you know what? I think you guys have to go to some open houses and get in touch with me when you have a better idea of what you want. Obviously, I say it much nicer. I have a meeting with them, whatever, but that's what I would do. I also like to show here sale price versus list price in the last 90 days, because I want them to know about strategic pricing. So strategic pricing is when you take 15% off of the price. 15% is a lot of money. Not every seller is comfortable doing it, but most properties, when they're put on the market, are way less than what they're actually worth. So if I have a home that I know is worth 450, I'm putting it on for 420 because it's going to create a buyer frenzy. It's going to make the process emotional, and we're going to get a ton of offers. So that's always a strategy. So when they see, like, a lot of times people think in this market, like it's like a car, like, oh, they put it on for 490 because they want 475. They know they're going to get talked down. It's like, no, this is not the same at all. It's the opposite, actually. They're heavily reducing the price because they want a ton of buyers. Yes. A ton of buyers to come at it. I would do it in any market, honestly. Strategic pricing in a buyer's market works, in my opinion.
So how do you determine how to have like a reasonable asking price? Like you go by percentage of what you
So-
would like to have as the ultimate?
So you do like a
amount, or-
comparative market analysis. So you really don't choose the price. You use data and you pull a report together, and it will give you the average price of what they think it should be. When you do that, I'm sorry. When they do that, then from there, you can discuss strategic pricing with them, and you can say, hey, I think it's worth 475, but if we take 5 or 10% off, we'll get way more buyers in here. And then you just take that percentage of that number and deduct from there. Sometimes people don't want to, a lot of the time, people don't want to do it. And I'm really sorry to be eating, I just don't want to fall down. A lot of times people are like irritated by it, and then I'll just do $1 now. Okay, well, let's take 10 off and see what happens. There are certain people that just don't want to do it, and that's okay. But you're looking out for their best interest. And talking about strategic pricing is part of that. So, any questions on this slide? None at all. Okay. So this is the home inspection. Why won't this go away? Oh, I have a chat. Okay, sorry. Okay. How do I close this? Go away. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I like to talk to them about home inspection because it's not what they think. Not many people have been to a home inspection. They have no idea what it's like. So the cost of a home inspection depends on the size of the home and the state they're buying in. A home inspection can cost anywhere from $300 to $850, but they're well worth the money. The $850 side of things is New Hampshire, because you need a septic inspection as well as a home inspection if there is private sewer. In Mass, we have Title V. So Title V requires the seller to disclose, okay, my septic, it's on them to figure out if their septic is running. And if there is no Title V, that's a whole other ballgame we won't get into right now. But in Mass, we have Title V. It's the responsibility of the seller. In New Hampshire, it's 100% the responsibility of the buyer. So you have to have a septic inspection. I had a septic fail this week, and so did Ashley. So it's very common, and it's very important that they know the importance of having a septic inspection. Sometimes they'll want to cut corners because it's $850 and they're irritated, but it's so worth the money, because a new septic or a new leach field is $15,000. So would you rather spend the $850, or would you rather get in and find out your leach field failed and now you have a $15,000 bill because it's a sewage issue? It's not something that can wait. So that's usually the general cost. You also want to build into your network home inspectors that you're comfortable with, because they're not just like in any profession. They shouldn't all be home inspectors. So there's certain ones that, like, we here at the office are comfortable promoting, but you'll go out and you'll experience more. You could be on the seller side of things and meet one that you like and just add them to your
Because
database.
the home inspector can't inspect the septic system.
No, a lot of the times they have affiliate partners. So like RJ Home Inspections uses Kent. HiNet Home Inspection uses Low Liberty. So there's all different septic companies. And a lot of the times when you go to a home inspection, they'll just say, hey, I'm willing to do this for you. I'll just set it up. Don't worry about it. And if not, then they'll say, we don't do that here. Go find somebody else.
But that's included in the price of the inspection.
No, it's separate. It's a separate company. So they'll probably charge you like between $300 and $500 for the home inspection. And then the septic inspection will probably be between $200 and $350, depending. Yeah. I know, because you used to do that, right?
I was qualified to do that, and then when I saw what people were doing, I said, no way.
No, I know. They have a lot of cool gadgets now. They got the cameras and everything.
Yeah.
So the timeline. In most cases, buyers have 10 days from the time of an accepted offer to have the home inspected prior to P&S being due. A big part of my job is to make sure the timeline is adhered to in order to protect your deposit. A shorter timeline is more competitive. So if you can't, if you can't waive your home inspection, something that might help them compete is like, okay, I'll have my inspection done in 5 days instead of 10. Just so that the sellers know if they have to put their house back on the market, they can do it within 5 days. It's also something you have to keep track of that day, because if, say, this literally just happened to me. So we had a septic issue. Something was blocking the camera from seeing the leach field. So we needed them to come back out. We didn't have enough time. So I had to send an extension, because if I didn't send an extension, the seller's agent could take my client's deposit and put their house back on the market. That's legally what they're allowed to do based on the contract. So most of the time that does not happen. And usually you have a co-broke that wants to keep the deal together and doesn't want to do all of this work all over again. So they'll be like, hey, do we need an extension? But that's really your job to maintain and keep track of. So that's something that you want to pay close attention to. If you're waiving your home inspection, then obviously it just goes right to P&S, and then they usually get the deposit. It's always at the time of purchase and sales, but maybe they'll just do one big deposit up front and then do the purchase and
Can you
sales.
waive the septic system inspection?
Yeah, because this is in New Hampshire too, and I don't want to, this is the difference. So Title V, the seller is required to have the town inspect and issue a Title V certificate showing the septic is in working order prior to selling. And usually the lender needs a copy of the Title V. So you can't really get a loan.
But if it's a cash deal,
But if it's a cash deal, then
they can still.
they can sell it.
inspection.
They can sell it. But if you're borrowing money in the bank in mass, the bank is going to want to know, can I have a Title V? And if there's no Title V, that's the problem. You got to figure out who's responsible for it. Are you going to bring it up to code? Like, what's going to happen? So that's something that you're going to have to negotiate. And this is why in real estate, there's like 8 different bridges I could take you down in 8 different scenarios, because it's really just a case by case thing. I learn something new every time I do a new transaction. So in New Hampshire, it's on the buyer to have the septic inspected. So in New Hampshire, you can waive that. Absolutely. Would I recommend it? Absolutely not. I've had a client who willingly bought a home with no functioning septic, and she was totally fine with that. And she was in New Hampshire. As long as she doesn't tell her lender, there's nothing I can do. I mean, I strongly discourage it, but
Isn't that
she's their own person. Huh?
Isn't that far from the tell the lender?
No, it's not on the bank. It's on her. They don't want to know. If it was a requirement, they would say, give me a copy of that septic inspection, but it's not a requirement in New Hampshire. In Mass it is, but in New Hampshire, it's not. Live free or die.
Yeah.
High taxes. So negotiating. We're going to do a class on negotiating. That's my favorite class, because I get to do all of my nightmare deals with you guys. I think I'm going to be doing that tomorrow. I'm pretty sure it's that one. So negotiating. These are items that are likely to come up within a transaction. So, and this again, right now, I'm kind of, what you're viewing is what I'm showing my buyers, because I want them to, again, have an expectation for what to expect through this process. It's not going to be like, exact, and I'm probably not going to hit every little thing that could happen, because there's a million things that could happen, and I could talk forever about it. So our first step in negotiating would probably be a repair list or a price reduction. Usually the seller is willing to accommodate fixes for problems that arise in a home inspection. The issues would normally be pretty significant to warrant a price reduction. A lot of first-time home buyers have their parents involved, and their parents think that, like, oh man, the dishwasher's broken, take 10 G's off the house. That's not how it works. So if you're a seller, would you rather take $10,000 off your house or just go buy a new dishwasher? You'd probably just go buy a new dishwasher. So these are things that you want to know upfront, because you will get that. And so I like to set the expectation of a price reduction is highly unlikely. So get it out of your head now. This is my polite way of telling them that. It's just unlikely. They might do a credit. They might say, okay, we'll credit you at your closing. And that's kind of the same thing, but it's not. So that's just something I like to set the expectation for. Most of the time, especially if it's like major system issues, the seller is more than willing to accommodate if they're able. Sometimes someone is about to lose their home, and their home is depreciating rapidly because they don't have the money to maintain it. And in that situation, you usually know that ahead of time. And so you want to set the expectation for your buyers in that situation that, like, this person's about to lose their house. They're not going to be able to afford anything. And usually it's sold as is. And sometimes buyers will test you or push it and say, I know it's sold as is, but this is a major thing. And you can say, listen, this person has no money. You know, they might be able to give you a credit at closing because they have proceeds from their sale in this market. Luckily enough, it's not a short sale. And then you can fix it when you get in there, but you just have to know the situation is different everywhere. And then there could be people that are just like, no. And in this market, people are like, okay, looks like it's something I have to deal with if I want to buy a house because there's nothing else to buy right now. So that would be a repair list or a price reduction negotiation.
What's the line, you know, you said staying in your lane, what's the line when you do negotiate?
When you're negotiating,
The lawyer and the realtor, what is that line?
negotiating is all you. So they negotiate the purchase and sales contract. You negotiate the terms. So you're negotiating the terms of the inspection piece usually. And then after, and like the financing deadline, the timeline is what you do. And then you pass that along to the, so in mass, like I would give them the contract to purchase, then I would have the home inspection, and then I would send them an email and say, we've negotiated, we're all on the same page, this is what we're doing. And then one of the attorneys writes up an addendum, sends it to the other attorney, they approve it, it's signed, we're good to go. So you're doing all of that. This is where also it really depends on what attorney you're working with. At that point, they haven't written the purchase and sales agreement, so it's highly unlikely that they're going to be involved to that level unless they personally know the person that they're representing. After the purchase and sales is usually when you kind of want to like, hey, do you want me to step in?
Yeah, because if you have a buyer, they've got an attorney, and they close an attorney. I can envision them calling up and saying, hey, you know, there are these things wrong with the house, and they ask the attorney.
No.
They wouldn't do that.
Well, because if you think about it, the attorney's representing the bank. They're not representing the buyer. They're representing the bank. They're no part of the buyer. And if they want to represent the buyer personally, there's a chance they're going to get billed every time they pick up the phone. Every time you
So
pick
when
up the
they-
phone
so
and
when
talk
you
to
tell
an
your
attorney.
clients, I didn't realize this, when you tell your client, get an attorney, that attorney's not representing them. They're
No.
representing the bank.
It's not that they're getting it. So for the buyer side of things, on the buyer side of things, they're required to have an attorney because they're borrowing money from a bank. So the bank is gonna want an attorney involved because it's really their home. Like the bank is buying it in reality.
So the buyer really has no legal
No.
representation.
They can ask, can you represent me too if stuff were to happen? But if you think about it, the closing attorney is representing the bank in the bank's best interest, which is therefore your client's best interest. It's really, it's all the same when it's in the terms that they're negotiating on the purchase and sales agreement. So I know you have your 2 cents. But if it came down to litigating, this is where knowing a lot of different attorneys is nice because real estate attorneys usually don't litigate. They're not going to go to court. They're like, I do title work and this is how I make my bread and butter. And I run contracts. This is what I do. It's uneventful. You know, maybe there's a title issue I have to do, whatever. It's not the same as two parties disagreeing, going to court together and having litigation over it. That's why if that were to happen and I was on the buyer side of things, and like, for instance, when someone tried to take my buyer's deposit, first person I called was a litigator. Well, actually, the first person I called was a real estate attorney. They told me to forfeit the deposit. Second person I called was a litigator, and he was like,
So
no.
so my list of litigators is different
Than your real estate attorneys. Very different. Because if you think about it, like, they're just different roles. Like a real estate. Me, for litigation, I use Tony Popolo. He's like, and he does a lot of real estate stuff too. He's like who is on here. And then I might use like Paul Lambert's in his same office, and he's a great real estate attorney. He might litigate as well. Some do both, but usually, like Tony will tell you, I'm a litigator. It's just in his nature. They're usually more aggressive. They're usually more cutthroat. Real estate attorneys are like realtors. We want to keep the deal together. We want terms that are making everybody happy. And we kind of live in this rainbow side of things is like, everything's fixable. We can make it work. Everyone's going to be happy. And 99% of the time, that's the case. But for that 1% of the time that's not, we got bulldogs like litigators that just go at each other and are cutthroat, which is great. But that's the difference. And most of the time, it's fine. You can just go through the closing attorney and everything's kosher, but the closing attorney usually isn't chosen until after the home inspection. So we'll get through the home inspection, and that's what triggers the lender to say, okay, we've negotiated these terms. This attorney is going to put this together for me.
When does the seller select the attorney?
They get more time because they only have to do the deed. They have to prepare the deed. And if there's, I always recommend getting them involved as early as possible because, well, and they have to review the purchase and sales. I'm sorry, I'm thinking with my New Hampshire brain. In Mass, same time, you want to get them involved because they're going to have to negotiate the purchase and sales agreement for them. And they're also going to have to write the deed. And they would have to kind of, if there's a title issue, that's for attorneys, huh?
So they just copy the old.
Yeah, well, they do, but they get charged for it. And well, not always, because if it's an estate issue, it could be, things are weird. Things are weird. In different sort of tenancies, people prefer, that's for the attorney to deal with, though. This is very much stay in your lane. If anyone asks you questions like that, here's my attorney friend.
I had an attorney charge me because of the spelling for the last 60 years of the deed, and I'm the one that had to pay.
Well, that's why it's also kind of like important for you to be present
And Rich
because,
said that was ridiculous. This was years ago.
yeah. Yeah, I've gotten to the point, and I don't ever recommend it. You guys are new, but I've been doing this long enough where I've had my clients' money returned from an attorney because I felt like they were taking complete advantage of. And I told them that. I told them I was going to report them to the bar, and then I thought, and they gave the money back.
It
Because-
wasn't a lot, but it was just correct.
And there's going to be things in real estate that irk you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But let's move on. So the contribution towards closing costs is probably the most common mitigation to an inspection issue. In lieu of repairs, the sellers will contribute towards their closing costs so that they have more cash in their pocket as they go. This, you know, sometimes you, in this market, you might say, hey, I'm going to increase my offer by 5,000 and ask for 5,000 back because I'm going to need that cash to fix this problem, but I want you to net the same so that you don't cut me off as a
Why
buyer.
would the seller do- why would the buyer do that? Why would the seller-
Because if you have three, you can take backup offers. And if the seller and buyer don't come to terms, if the buyer's saying, hey, I want you to do this, and they're saying no. If the buyer wants the house bad enough, they have to be flexible. They have to negotiate. And that's, I think, what separates good realtors from bad realtors. There's a way to, you know, represent your clients well. And also keep in mind that their end goal is to buy a home. So don't blow up the deal from being stubborn.
So
It's
they
just
say
not
I'm gonna pay
advisable.
$5,000 more. And then. they
It's
want
basically them
closing-
financing that $5,000.
And they want to close in credit.
So they're netting the
Provided
same.
that the closing credit, the closing costs of $5,000 or more. might be confusing.
Well, no, so your closing cost could be 13,000, but if you are getting a $5,000 credit, that's $5,000 that you don't need to bring back to the closing table. So
What
you
if the
can take
closing
that
costs are
$5,000
only $2,000? What happens to the get your 5,000 back?
escrows and prepaids. So it will go like to my commission, to whatever lending fees they have. When you write it out, you always want to write, I would like a $5,000 contribution to my buyers, escrows, prepaids, and closing costs. So there's a plethora of fees that the buyer gets hit with. And I can promise you that there's never going to be a situation where the closing cost is $3,000.
No, but I was just,
Yeah.
making you understand the principle.
Well, it's also like this is also where you have a team of people. This is not like a one-man show. Like if I'm like, hey, how much, I'm going to ask for closing cost credit. I'm going to call Donna or I'm going to call Matt and say, hey, how much is their closing costs about? Could you let me know? If it's in New Hampshire, it's going to be significantly higher than in Mass. So these are all things that you'll learn as you go and you'll learn as you navigate transactions. So these contribution towards closing costs are not just me pulling a number, you know, out of thin air. It's me discussing with their lender ahead of time, what are their closing costs looking like? Because and it's also me saying, okay, I've had a contractor come through. I extended the inspection period, I had a contractor come through and they told me how much this is going to cost. So can you give us a credit for half of that cost? You know, that's where it's not just me pulling a number out of thin air. It's a collaborative effort with contractors and the lender. So that's where it's important to have your team of people. So every house has something. I've said this again, but you literally cannot reiterate this enough to your buyers, especially first-time home buyers with their parents coming, which is most of the time. So know going into your home search that every house needs something. So keep your comfort level for repairs in mind when placing your offer. If you're not handy, if you're not like, you know, someone who's comfortable taking on something or don't have the excess funds to take on something, don't buy a house. It's $10,000 worth of work. That's for you to guide them. You know, if they're walking through a house and you're noticing, okay, this is their price range and everything in their price range needs a lot of work. They don't have the money or the comfortability level to handle it. You might want to have a conversation with them about, hey, why don't we wait 6 months? You know, houses aren't going anywhere. You can buy them, you know, wait 6 months. Let's see if the market cools down. And in 6 months, let's talk to the lender and figure out what we can do over a 6-month period to increase your budget. that would be a conversation I might have if they're continually uncomfortable. And these are things that you'll learn in time to kind of like finesse, because you want to deliver it in a way that's not offensive to them, because it can be hurtful to hear like you can't afford a house that you want, but you want to be realistic with them. I always remind my clients, I'm here to help you reach your real estate goals. That could mean now or 6 months from now. I don't want it to be just buy any house. I want you to buy the right house, and I want to make sure that you're happy, because I want repeat business. So every house has something. Remind them of that. If they're chronically bothered by like a house with a ton of work, when they send you a house they might be interested in and you see, this needs more work, let them know. Are you sure you want to go take a look at this? Because it looks like the X, Y, and Z. Maybe they still want to, and you evaluate from there. Home inspections can't reveal everything. You will get calls from your clients when they close after a home inspection. That's like, the hot water heater went. There's nothing you can do about that. A home inspection is a thorough inspection of your home. However, the inspector only has limited time to inspect, and they can only see apparent problems. They check all the major systems and will recommend further evaluation if needed. So they can't peel the walls back. For instance, I closed a deal in Derry, New Hampshire. This was where, you want to have a circle of people. And this is the beginning of my career, so I was much less confident. And my client wanted to do a home inspection, didn't want to pay for a home inspector. So her dad's friend was a contractor, and she said, he's going to go through the house and look at it. I said, okay, great, totally fine, whatever. She went through the house. I'm noticing things that are red flags for me, but this is a contractor she's comfortable with. This is a referral. They don't know me super well. So she went with him. There was like fire damage upstairs. Long story short, 2 months down the line, they're leaning on the wall and their whole arm goes through the wall. The whole room is covered in black mold. This woman is pregnant and she's putting her baby in this room. And so as they're doing the mold repair, they kind of just accept it for what it is. Like, okay, that sucks. There was mold, we missed it. Turns out that they knew about it and didn't disclose it, which is illegal. So they were actually able to get money from the prior owners to fix the issue. So these are things where, and sometimes you'll get like a home inspection. There was like a leak in the water heater that wasn't there when we had the home inspection. They'll call you, they'll be frustrated. You just want to remind them, and again, set the expectation beforehand that there could be things that come up. It's part of owning a home. There's going to be maintenance. They're going to do the best they can. At the home inspection, usually they feel comfortable at that point, because it's like a 4-hour thing sometimes. Like it's long, it's a lot. They do a lot of research, but they're not able to, if there's like personal property blocking one area of a garage, they're not allowed to touch that. So this is also something you want to keep in mind as a realtor. If you see that, tell the listing agent, could you please make sure that all the systems are accessible? Because you don't want to have the inspector have to come back out. That's a nightmare. So not a nightmare, it's just pain. So I try to set the expectation that yes, you'll have a home inspection. Yes, you'll likely find a lot of stuff that needs fixing, or you'll feel reassured that the house is fine. However, something could happen after you close. It just is what it is. So this is the purchase and sales agreement step. This is where I let the attorney take over during my home buyer presentation. So I would say this is about the purchase and sales agreement. Here's Tony Popolo. He's going to discuss some contingencies. I'm going to go over them with you. To go over them in depth, I'd highly recommend setting up some time with an attorney. Mitchell Weissman is an attorney that's in here. He's excellent. He would be more than happy to sit with you and have some time. Any attorney. I know that attorneys can be intimidating, but once you start working with them a lot more, you think they're just regular people, and they're in the service industry just like you're in the service industry, and they know that if you are comfortable with them, you'll refer them business, and it's the same here. If they're comfortable with you, they'll refer you business. So don't think of it as like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to an attorney, I'm scared. It's a business. They want to share just like you want to share. So the purchase and sales is a document that sets out the rights and obligations of everyone in a real estate transaction. The document will contain some important dates to keep track of for your transaction. Your job is to maintain those dates. And if they need adjusting, it's your job to make sure that those are adjusted. Because if you don't, your buyer will lose their deposit and you will get sued. Or you will have lost their ability to, it could be a point where if they've put $20,000 down and you miss the financing deadline and the seller takes that $20,000 and puts their house up on the market, there's nothing you can do about that. They're going to have to go to court. They're likely not going to get their money back because they have every contractual right to do what they did on the seller side. And then that just leaves you. You didn't pay attention to the financing deadline. And now I lost all my money and I can't buy another house because all of my savings was that deposit. You don't ever want to be in that situation. So I cannot stress enough that is your job to maintain these dates for these contingencies. You can say, okay, yeah, the attorney might do it. Yeah, that's great if you're both doing it, but you absolutely need to be keeping these in your calendar, setting reminders, no, like 5 days ahead of time. Start checking in 5 days before the financing commitment. Because if you're waiting till the day of, this is not something you want to be in. So the inspection contingency, this section of the PNS gives you the right to withdraw from the transaction if you aren't satisfied with the results of a home inspection. It's usually the first deadline you'll have in a real estate transaction. The mortgage contingency, if you're buying a home with a mortgage, this contingency is important. It will likely contain 2 dates. The contingency says that if you aren't able to obtain a mortgage after good faith efforts, you may be able to back out of the deal. So the mortgage contingency is basically what we were discussing about, like that clear to close financing deadline that we talked about in the beginning. The financing deadline is what is going to let you know that you've hit your financing, your mortgage contingency date. So, okay, the bank has given a letter. It's a bank commitment letter, and there's usually conditions on it. And you want to make sure that all of those conditions are cleared except for what is remaining for the rest of the transaction. So if you have your bank commitment date, your mortgage contingency date, and you have the appraisal on there, you have some paperwork they haven't turned in on there, that's not good enough. That is not a good bank commitment. That means that you still have some conditions to remove from your approval. So that would make me think, I need an extension. I'm going to get an extension to make sure that I can deal with the rest of these contingencies, that the lender has time and the buyer has time, and hopefully they agree. Usually they do, because contractually they have to, in good faith, work with you. So if you're letting them know ahead of time, hey, we have a couple more contingencies in place. A big one right now is the appraisal. Can't get bank commitment, or you can't get a financing contingency date hit if you don't have the appraisal. I had a deal that was closing on the 9th. The appraisal didn't come out till the 6th. Do you think that's closing? No, that's going to push out a week. So these are all things you want to keep in mind. The title contingency, it's a part of the purchase and sales agreement that gives you the right to back out of the deal if there are issues with the title to the property. It also generally will contain the amount of money the seller has to spend to fix title issues. The title contingency is a big one because title issues are huge, and that could mean that someone else can take claim to the property you're buying. If there's any deal that anything in real estate that could potentially not be fixable, it's a title issue.
So you have a mortgage contingency, they have to apply for their mortgage.
That's their lending. Yep.
That's their lending. Talk about title contingency.
So this is a big attorney thing. This is where it's beneficial to have an attorney on this, because we really have very little to do with the
So
title.
the buyer's attorney checks the title.
This is the bank's attorney is
Checks
checking the title.
Does that happen after?
So basically what they're doing,
Does that happen during the mortgage?
it should happen pretty early, but it really depends on, again, you're not the only deal they're working on. So if they have usually they'll pick it up 2 weeks prior to closing, 2-3 weeks prior to closing, they're going to pick it up. They're going to start paying attention to it. Maybe they'll get ahead and do it early and then put it down and pick it back up when we get closer to closing. But usually there's other deadlines they have to hit that are more important. And the closer your deadline comes, the closer they're paying attention to it. The title, what the attorney is doing is they're pulling the deed. They're pulling at the registry of deeds, pulling any liens on the property and discharges. If there is a missing discharge, that means there's that lien on the property. So it's your job. Well, the attorney should really be hunting it down. However, for timeliness purposes, sometimes it's you. So for instance, I just sold a house in Lawrence 2 months ago, and it was a situation where there was a mortgage from 1984 and there was no discharge at the registry of deeds. So that means that that's a lien. We can't close with an open lien. It needs to be tied up, buttoned up to say, okay, you borrowed money, it's paid. You borrowed money, it's paid. You borrowed money, it's paid. If sometimes there's liens as far as contractors liens. If you were to do an inspection on someone's home and they didn't pay you, you'd put a lien on their property. And that usually can just get paid from the proceeds. When it's a bank deed issue is when it becomes yucky. So for instance, this one in Lawrence, I reached out to the homeowner. Unfortunately, it was an estate sale. So the person who dealt with all the finances died. So I had to kind of maneuver who was the original loan holder. They're closed. Who took over from them? They closed. Who took over from them? They closed. Who took over from them? And then you finally reach your source and you're able to say, hey, I have this deed from 1985. Could you please let me know if you have any release on record? And if not, can you give us something to file with this current deed that will allow us to release this. That should really be what the attorneys and the paralegals are doing. But sometimes for the sake of timeliness, if you have a bunch of transactions balancing, if you have your buyer is selling their home and the person they're buying from is selling their home and buying another home, the timeline really matters. It can leave people like homeless. So you want to make sure that that timeline's adhered to. So if you have the time and energy and can jump in, I always recommend that you do. However, always check with the attorney first and stay in your lane. Because if
you're
you
saying
proactively do that and the paralegal's doing it too, the attorney's going to let you know, stop doing that. So it really depends on who you're working with.
Well, so as a realtor,
Hmm.
even if we don't do it officially and give the clients the result, we should, they're saying we should trace the title back 50 years.
Sometimes, if it happens, I mean, realistically, this is the attorney's job. But if they need your help, this is where the realtor is a support role in Mass. If they're like, hey, if you want this to close, could you help me do this? I'm gonna do it. Like,
Because-
you don't have to, but I'm gonna do it because I want the deal closed.
Mitch and Mary Ann were here. And she said that there was an issue where they discovered an easement on the property just before the closing.
Mhm.
And I said, well, wouldn't that have come up earlier? And Mitch said, I asked him twice. He said, no, that doesn't happen until
Shortly before
until
closing.
just before the closing. So I'm thinking, well, I would just automatically, when I pull the deed to get the names right, I would check the title.
I know, but this is where you
But
want to kind of,
It's like, am I?
you
stepping out
can,
of
you
my lane?
are, you're stepping out of your lane and you could absolutely do that, but it's like doing someone else's job
And then
and
say, hey, by
they're
the
gonna do
way,
it.
you know what I found?
they might take, it depends on like, you don't want to get into that habit. You have enough on your plate when you're the realtor. They're not calling the attorney when they're upset. They're not calling the attorney when they're confused. They're calling you.
No, I called the bank attorney and said, by the way, just heads up.
Yeah, they'll probably be like, thanks, Frank, and never
Good.
acknowledge it. But that's why I wouldn't waste your time doing it. It's their process to pick it up at the end also, because if their financing is going to fall apart and they just did all this title work, they're going to bill this client for title work they're never going to get paid for. So until their loan is like looking approved, they're probably not going to pick it up, because if their deal falls apart because of buyer financing, then where does that leave the attorney's office? They get paid when it closes, just like we get paid when it
But,
closes.
but Anne Marie was saying that deal almost didn't go through because they
Yeah.
discovered this easement at the last minute. And
Yeah.
It's like,
But this is where what's a real estate emergency comes into play, because realistically, yeah, it almost didn't close, but did it really almost didn't close, or did we just need more time? We probably just needed more time. Because I don't think that when I say the deal almost didn't close, that's usually because there's friction between buyer and seller and they're being unreasonable. If it's a matter of there's a title issue and we need more time than what we've allotted to fix it because it's popped up last minute, it's not the deal wouldn't almost come together. It's just that we need more time. And can the buyer and seller accommodate that time? If they can, then we're good. If they can't, we gotta figure it out.
is the buyer responsible for meeting that type of contingency?
It's part of their financing. The bank won't lend if the title is
So
not
they
clear.
can always say, hey, look, if I can't.
There's
get mine-
multiple that kind of like cover each other. So like even like with the like mortgage and title kind of all kind of is
So
married
if
to
they
each
don't
other.
get the financing because of the title issue.
They get their
can
deposit
still
back.
up and get
Yeah.
their deposit
And it's
back.
allowing to say like, okay, if I'm a cash buyer, or if like, I'm only borrowing 35% of what the home is what I'm offering, then the bank isn't gonna care if there's a title issue, but I'm gonna care because I'm gonna have to deal with it. So I have this title contingency, so I can move it along if this title issue is too much for me. I've had a client purchase a home and sign on to the fact that she knew she was gonna have to follow up with title issues. So there's a million different ways to remedy situations. Every attorney's gonna do it different. Every realtor's gonna do it different. It's just based on their experience. So a title issue is a big one because it can take a long time. And if you have a cash buyer who didn't purchase title insurance, then it's a real issue, because then they're on the hook for fixing it, and that can cost a lot of money. Okay, so the appraisal contingency, when you're buying a home, part of the process will be to have a professional come in and determine the value of the home. This is subjective evaluation of the home by a professional appraiser. Are you looking for him? Oh my God, hi guys. Cheese. You can cheese. Guys, cheese for my photo. But
Perfect, all right.
thank you. So the appraisal contingency, this is where I do it a little different. The last 3 deals that I put together for my buyers, I've gotten like between $30,000 and $40,000 cut off the price, because your appraisal, if you're putting like, 10% down, is part of your financing contingency. This appraisal contingency is there for people whose bank isn't running an appraisal. So if they're, again, borrowing less than, borrowing more than 20%, they have the right to waive their appraisal contingency. Would I ever recommend that? Absolutely not. But as part of the mortgage contingency, if you're working with people who are putting less than 20% down, which is most people, what I do as a strategy is I will target overpriced listings, put an offer in at asking, knowing that it's going to come in low. And then at that point, we're so far into the process that the seller's usually more than willing to work with us. The only downer is I set the expectation up front with my buyer of, if this hit on price can't be sustained by the seller, so say they need a certain amount of money to buy the property that they're moving to, then the deal could fall apart, and you need to be okay with that. So I set the expectation up front before I do it, but you don't really need an appraisal contingency if they're borrowing less than, if they're only putting, less than 20% down. The appraisal is covered as part of the mortgage contingency, because the bank will not lend if the appraised value is not right. So it is not the same as the offer price. So the appraisal contingency is redundant, but it's probably there for people who are putting, cash or don't have the bank's restriction on appraisal. It's up to them whether they want the appraisal or not, which is not most people, but it's become more of a hot topic in this market. And a lot of times I'll submit offers and someone will call me and say, are you going to put a contingency about appraisal in there? And I will say no, because it's covered under the mortgage contingency. In Mass, it's written by the attorney and they'll usually work that in there. But now attorneys more and more are asking, do you want an appraisal contingency in there? Because it's becoming an issue. So a home sale contingency is something that we don't see as much now, because less and less people are getting those offers accepted. If you have a home sale contingency, it's the condition that allows you to back out of the transaction if part of the deal is that you have to sell an existing home in order to finance the new purchase. Technically, this also falls under the mortgage contingency, but you should be doing a home sale contingency. You should be upfront if your client needs to sell their home to buy, but it also falls as part of the financing, because if they can't sell their home, they can't have enough money for their down payment and they can't purchase, their financing falls apart. But if you were to do that and not put a home sale contingency in there, you can get in hot water. So it's definitely beneficial to have. And if there's in Mass, an attorney most times will be writing this. There are boilerplate PNS contracts that you can use. I don't recommend it. I always recommend that your clients get an attorney. And that's what that is. So a home sale contingency is just basically letting them know that if I can't sell my house, I'm not buying this one. And more people are turned away, like their offers aren't even looked at, because they don't want to have to deal with that. It's like balancing that home sale plus this home sale plus another home sale. Sellers have the option of choosing, luckily right now, but we will return to a market that's not like that in time. Miscellaneous contingencies, while above are the most common contingencies, there could be a variety of conditions that apply to your specific situation. If making this purchase has any kind of condition you need imposed, it is imperative your agent and attorney know this well in advance. So this is where, it could be like, upfront that you're going to be out of your home sooner than when this can close. So you might need to do a use and occupancy agreement. That would be in addition to the purchase and sales agreement. That's giving you permission to move in early before you own the home. You could do a hold harmless agreement, knowing, okay, I have a place to stay, but I have nowhere to put my stuff. So I'm going to do a hold harmless agreement. I'm going to move some of my stuff into your home, and then we'll close and I'll move in after that. So these are all just examples of different miscellaneous contingencies that can be at play. An addendum is an addendum. It's more relevant in New Hampshire. Everything in New Hampshire is an addendum, because you just start with the purchase and sales. There's a home inspection addendum, then there could be an appraisal addendum, there could be a price reduction addendum. It's just addendum after addendum after addendum in New Hampshire. And addendum is very vague. It's just like, this is just terms that are not specific, that aren't touched upon in the regular purchase and sales agreement. Tony likes to add, don't be afraid to ask your lawyer questions. We work for you, and it is important that you fully understand what's going on. Once this transaction is closed, your ability to have a legal recourse for issues with the home becomes extremely limited. So basically take advantage of the fact that you have an attorney and that you can ask them a bunch of questions.
Well, it's the bank's attorney.
It is the bank's attorney, but the bank's interest and your interests are very similar. So because the bank doesn't want to buy a home that's falling down. Do you want to buy a home that's falling down? No. You want to make sure that those contingencies that are in place from the bank's attorney, they also is basically saying, you know, let me know what you're comfortable with too, because you have a say in that. Because the bank is not negotiating on behalf of the home inspection, and the bank is not negotiating on behalf of, you know, a use and occupancy agreement, but the bank's attorney is gonna set that in place for you after we negotiate it. So they really are doing both, but they represent the bank when things hit the fan, and that's why if things hit the fan, you get a litigator. So this is appraisal. An appraisal is the process of developing an opinion of value for real property using comparative properties usually sold in the last 3 to 6 months. This is similar to a CMA, but it's different because appraisers can adjust based on, you know, if they think that there needs to be added value or less value. The buyer is responsible for paying for the appraisal as part of the mortgage process so that an unbiased opinion of value can be provided to the bank prior to lending funds. If the appraisal comes in and is at a price point that is lower than the offered sale price, buyer and seller can usually renegotiate. In this highly competitive market, it isn't unheard of for buyers to pay more cash to supplement for a lower appraised value. And a low appraisal can affect your loan process if you're working for a lower down payment. So if you're putting 3.5% down and your appraisal came in $20,000 less than what you offered, and they want you to give them $10,000 extra dollars, like you don't have 10 G's to give them. So that becomes a problem. Your financing is going to fall apart, and then you're not going to be able to buy something.
From the seller's point of view, generally speaking, like, do they usually counter offer halfway whatever the difference is?
It depends on them.
Generally.
It depends on, again, it's situational. Like if they have 10 offers and they accepted one, and there could be another one that has terms that are better, then they might go back to that offer. So they might say, no, pay me all of it, or this person's going to.
Say there's no other option, and that's the only one.
That's the only one.
Yeah.
It depends. If it were me, I personally like to remain ethical across the board, and I'm going to tell them I don't think that you should be asking for more. It's like me telling you your car is worth 12 grand. Give me, 16 for it. You know what I mean? It's like you're putting them in an upside down situation. Yes, I'm looking out for the best interest of my seller, but if I see that their buyer, their only offer is only putting 5% down, realistically, I know they don't have the money. Like they're not going to have the money to make up the difference. So do you want to start over? Another position I always present to sellers is, okay, say you ask them for half and you're being really stubborn and you don't want to negotiate. You want to say, I want what you offered me and that's it. And the buyer says, too bad, I can't, and the deal's off. You're going to have to put your house back on the market and explain, oh, I wanted more than what my house was worth, and the buyer walked. You think other buyers are going to be interested in that? No, they're going to be like, no, I don't want to work with you.
So obviously it's hard to lower than what's offered. My question for you is, what is your loans to the buyer?
Oh, I don't care. It's fine. No, it's fine.
But what's a good way for the seller's position?
So you can bring them comps. You can bring them comps. You can, so if you're on the listing side of things, the appraiser's calling the listing agent and saying, hey, I'm going to come in. What day works for you? You usually meet them there, you let them in, and you can say, hey, just so you know, I use these comps. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they're like, oh, cool. No, thank you. And sometimes they're like, oh, great. Okay, wonderful. A lot of times appraisers they can't, because of the last market crash, we have very limited interaction in what they're allowed to talk with us about, but they're people. So like if I go to a listing appointment, if I go and it's on my listing and I'm talking to them, they're going to tell me I'm like, listen, I priced this as best I could, but because the market is scarce, I have very little comps to work with. This is what I used. They usually are like, yeah, I know. I've already, they're looking ahead of time before they show up, and then they're just going there to look at condition to compare. But they're going to be like, yeah, I know, I understand. I'm having a rough time with comps. They can go outside of the town. So as for me, I like to remain, if I'm in Methuen, all my comps are going to be in Methuen. Maybe I'll use one in, a nicer part of Lawrence or in Haverhill if I have to, but I'm very uncomfortable doing that. An appraiser may choose to do that. And it really just depends on your comfortability level.
Last question. So I know of a situation where there was an appraisal that was below what was offered.
Yep.
In this market. Expected, but the appraisal was based on square footage that was less than what was originally quoted to the buyer or the seller.
Mhm.
So they thought it was X amount, and then it was because it was style home.
Yeah,
They
below
had
the
a
grade
less
is valued at
than
half.
Previously, appraised for, so what would?
Appraised or comped at from a realtor? Because there's a difference. So if it's from an appraiser, they could say, nah, 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 look at this appraisal I have. This is showing this.
Listing.
Okay, so that's the,
Square footage. So they said, okay, it's 1,800 square feet,
Mhm.
yada, yada. And then the appraisal came back when they ended up selling it, it was only, I think, 100.
Yeah, it was like off.
something. So what would the realtor do in that situation?
the seller.
The seller.
You can counter and just say, listen, but a 200 square foot difference is not gonna make or break a deal. It's not gonna like, you know what I mean? If someone's coming to me and saying, oh my God, they use these comps that are 200 square, I'm gonna be like, buddy, what's 200 square feet? Like, and it's also like in a Cape, you have to like prepare them for the fact that like anything that's below the grade, like some people will finish their basement and be like, oh my God, finish my basement. It's gonna be wonderful. It's gonna add so much value to my house. In reality, it's gonna add half the value had you added an addition to the back of your home. This is why you want to talk to a realtor before you do work on your home, because anything below the grade is valued at half of what if it was above the grade.
Oh, really?
So that could be an issue too. So they could say, okay, yeah, okay, there's 1,800 square feet, but 200 of that square feet is in the basement, and maybe they don't have a suspended ceiling, so they consider it unfinished. Maybe it's like carpet, drywall, no ceiling. And the appraiser could come in and say, this is not a finished basement. So it really varies. And you can, as a seller's agent, challenge an appraisal. You absolutely can. You have every right to. Sometimes on the buyer side of things, like I've been in a situation where I had an appraisal come out and it makes it very difficult to do my job. And this is why you want to connect people with good lenders. It was a bigger bank. And so I was on the buyer side. My client had their appraisal submitted, and it came back at asking. And then the bank turned around and said they didn't like it and issued a new appraiser to come out. And then it was less than what we offered. So normally I'd be like, yeah, great. But the seller can now say to me, well, we have an appraisal in our hands that has it at asking. So it's not my problem that your lender didn't like it, because clearly this appraiser agreed with my value. So it makes it hard for me to do my job, because then I can say they're not wrong. Like then I have to go to my client and be like, well, this is what we're up against, you know? So there's all different situations. Not every appraiser is going to agree. Just like I might not, Brian might go do a CMA at one house and I'll go right after him and we could have different numbers and we could just not agree, you know? And that's really that. It's very little that you can do in an appraisal situation because it's heavy regulation due to the last market crash. We were able to get them to, so it was a flip luckily, and usually flips just want to close fast because they are usually like have one foot into another investment and they need the money. So we were benefited in that situation. My client was like a super nervous kind of guy, was not comfortable going up, but I think we might have maybe like contributed an extra 5,000. Like I think that we met halfway. Most of the time you meet halfway. Sometimes your client is the unreasonable one. And that's what makes our job difficult, because you have to be like politely, like, this is not abnormal for them to be asking. This is, you know what I mean? So this is where our job gets weird. So no, I want conversation. None of the classes that you take of mine are just me talking at you, because I've been in classes where I'm nodding off. So I'd rather you guys talk.
So when you're kind of building your, your list of people, your network, how do you determine a good lender?
A good,
Inspector, like, yeah, you go through a list and find a bunch of names, but, other than reading Google reviews, like.
no, I would not go by the internet. I would go by people in the office. Like I have people that I've worked with that I know I'll recommend. And I have people that I've worked with that I would hard no for me, dog. So I would let you know that if you're coming to me and you're like, hey, Sarah, who do you use? I'm going to let you know. Part of the business development program is that I have everyone go to people in the office and ask who they use. I made Brian do it. I make Kelly do it. I make them go and say, hey, I'm new to the office. Who do you use for home inspections? Who do you use for attorneys? Because everyone wants to share, you know what I mean? It's not like people are like, no, like they would prefer to give the attorney, look at, I'm hooking you up with this realtor. So give me a buyer, you know what I mean? Or give me a seller or whatever. So it's kind of like, everyone wants to see each other do well. If you go to agents in this office specifically, they will help you. Jamie and me and Ashley and Jill have all worked with home inspectors, and this is just on the leadership team. Forget about the ALC. That's what the ALC is there for. They're there to guide you if you need help. They're the leadership council, so you want to go to them specifically too. any agent in the office that's on a deal will tell you. They want to talk with you. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't go by the internet. Go by what, what you hear in classes. Anyone that comes into this market center is usually amazing. We're not going to share crappy people with you. So like RJ Home Inspections is a great one. High Net Home Inspections is a great one. There's a few, there's a bunch. We have like Mitchell Weissman is like the go-to attorney in here. You'll work with more as you go along because like you get assigned an attorney usually, and then you might work with them and be like, oh, I like working with this person. Like the lender that I love, I've found the buyer and he had already known her and we connected and we've been working together for 7 years now. I will refer 95% of my business to her because I trust her and I know she'll get it done. She's incredible. So, and there are more people that I add to that. There's RMS, incredible, amazing lending, because they're not always going to go with you, but sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes they'll bring you a good lender and it's like, awesome, wonderful. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll want to go with like a Bank of America or a TD Bank, and you're just going to have to want to cry the whole time. And just, I do try to let them know it's their choice, whoever they want to go with. However, a bigger bank is less likely to stick with the timeline because their process is their process. They don't think outside that box. And because of that, they don't understand that the seller doesn't always have to agree. We can ask for a financing extension, but can we ask for 3 financing extensions? Probably not. At that point, the deal's going to fall apart. And then you have to do more chasing on your end. It's stressful for them. It's stressful for you. Sometimes they listen to you. Sometimes they don't. So there's that. Underwriting. This is where I would have my lender step in. I have nothing to do with underwriting. All I tell my clients as far as underwriting goes, if I were to do this, is, hey, make sure that anything you send to them, you keep handy, because there's a chance they'll ask for it again. However, I'm noticing that they're moving faster. They're turning these approvals out faster.
What's the difference between an underwriter and a lender?
A lender is facilitating. So a lender is communicating with me, they're communicating with the attorney, and they're communicating with the underwriters. They're collecting the information and they're submitting it to the underwriter. Jason's a lender. He's a servicer. Yeah, so he's a lender. And then he has underwriters that he has to answer to. So when Jason says, hey, I saw on your W-2 that you last year made half as much money as you did this year, and the underwriters want to know why. That would be something that's not coming from Jason, it's coming from an underwriter, and it's his responsibility to get it.
Now, is Bank of America an underwriter?
Bank of America has underwriters, they're great. Well, basically, if it's a bigger bank, the issue is that they tend to have hubs of processors in different areas that are like all over the place. So like if you're processing a loan in Mass and they're doing the underwriting in Pennsylvania, it's a totally different situation in Pennsylvania than it is in Mass. They're not really going to be super familiar with it. And they're usually processing like 100 loans. Like I literally have had a conversation with them and they said, I'm sorry, I'm processing 100 loans. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Like with Jason, the underwriter doesn't work for Jason. He's just
The underwriter is like the
Some
deal
company.
killer. It's like the Undertaker. It's like they're going to be vetting the buyer. They're going to be asking for the pay stubs. If there's any discrepancy on pay stubs, if there's any difference, they're going to be the ones that are going to be like, or if there's a huge deposit in your bank account, where'd that come from? You're going to need a letter. That's coming from the underwriter. They will ask for that for the pre-approval, but not everything is as cut and dry sometimes. So like if this, for instance, prime example, I have a client who's a police officer. He obviously does well. His wife's a teacher, but she's pregnant with her 3rd child. And because of COVID, she doesn't want to go back to school because she is pregnant and she's got 2 kids and she's not trying to get sick. So she's deciding, I'm going to take a step back. Now their underwriting has changed. So now the underwriter is saying they're luckily not under contract. They're slowly looking, but I have them connect with my lender to say, they ask me, hey, Sarah, I don't want to work anymore. This is a situation. If I stay home, Vince can do a ton of overtime and it's going to compensate what I would have made. And I say, that's great. You have to talk to Donna because Donna's the lender. She's going to be the one that's going to be able to tell you if that's going to work. And if not, what he has to do to supplement that. So we go to Donna. Donna takes it to the underwriter and the underwriter says, well, there's risk because he's the sole provider. So we can only qualify them for what they were already qualified for. No different, or maybe it was less or something, because if, say, for instance, they do a risk assessment, like if he were to die or something were to happen to him, Liz has no income. So if Liz has no income, then there's an issue. It's a risk to the bank. And that's basically what the underwriter's job is to do, is what is this risk? How likely are they to be able to pay their loan? And so that's where if he had 30 days of pay stubs, the underwriter might come back and say, you know, I'm gonna have to play around with this, and if not, you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer before we can approve your loan. Or you're gonna have to be okay with the fact that we're reducing your, what you can borrow to like a certain amount. So it's really situational. A lot of real estate is situational. That's why when you guys ask me questions and I'm like, well, it's because it's situational. Every situation is different. But these are all things like I also run into issues where if someone is a green card holder and not an American citizen buying a property, that is an underwriting thing. You know, they can have an issue where they might need additional documentation, and that could sometimes take time because they need certain things signed by the embassy and all kinds of stuff. So the underwriter's job is to let the lender know what that stuff is, and the lender's job is to coordinate with me and the client to get all that wrapped up and pretty sent. So I like to talk about closing costs because nobody knows about closing costs, and I don't know why. But when some people buy, they think like, oh, closing costs $2-3 grand, no problem. So I like to add this little important note that says, in addition to your down payment, you'll need closing costs, which are expensive. However, you can ask the seller to pay for some or all, and the lender can sometimes credit some as well. Be sure to discuss options with Matt, because Matt was the one I was doing this with. And I do change this out depending on what lender I'm working with. So obviously, we all know that closing costs can be as much as your down payment sometimes. They're very expensive. If you're putting like a minimal amount down, it's a lot. Sometimes you have VA loans, and if they're using a VA loan and they don't have to put any money down and they have nothing saved, that's going to be a problem because they're still going to need to pay for those closing costs. You know, I've had closing costs be as high as, you know, 13,000. I've heard other agents of closing costs of 24,000, and those are usually from bigger banks. There's also programs that certain lenders might do. So if you're in a situation where it's going to affect your borrowing or if you have to make it work and you can afford the increase in your interest, they might raise it by 0.5% and then cover like $3 grand of your closing costs. Huh? Well, I think that Matt does. So we're going to do lending on Friday, and they come in and itemize exactly what it is. It's a breakdown usually of your tax payments plus your property tax payments plus any, if you have like public water sewer, that's included in that because you have to pay that a prorated amount. And then plus there's lending fees, attorney fees. It's all of that. And that's why the seller pays. No, seller pays commission. If you, and this is a big one, if you have a buyer agency contract and you're saying I do 3% and the MLS is only offering 2 or 2.5, it's your responsibility to discuss with your client that they are responsible for the remaining 0.5% or percent. If that's the case, then you have to make sure that they know they have to bring that to the closing table, and that would be part of their closing costs. Ordinarily, don't worry about it. Yeah, I can send it out. Yeah. This is recorded too. Yeah. What's your name?
Jane.
Jane? Okay, I'm sorry.
Is there another series after this one?
Yeah, tomorrow and Friday. Tomorrow and Friday, and we're gonna run this every 6 weeks, and it will get better.
Awesome. Thank you so
It gets
much.
better with time.
Are these slides available?
Yeah, I have them on the, well, if you're part of the PC program, I have them on there, but I'll talk to Jamie about getting you access to it. But where was I going? Oh, so if you have a 3% buyer contract, it's your responsibility to make sure that the buyer knows, hey, that 0.5% is going to be tacked onto your closing costs. And that's communicated with the attorney and the lender because they're the one that's putting all those numbers together. You're not. So, you know, that's that. That's the only situation where the buyer would be paying for commission. Or if it's a for sale by owner, seller isn't willing, and you have that discussion up front of, hey, you're going to have to pay a buyer fee now, then that's a different story. Usually the seller covers commission because the closing costs are very expensive. So if you have the buyer coming to the table with their down payment plus their closing costs, they can't cover commission too. It's just unrealistic. So usually the seller is covering most, if not all, of the commission. And that's what's on their side of the closing disclosure. Okay. So basically, this is a synopsis of what to do, and I let the lender do it. So don't make any changes to your profile. New job, obtaining new credit before talking to me. Make sure you talk to your clients about not buying cars. Don't finance furniture once you get under contract. That's like a nightmare. Sometimes people get really excited. They get their home inspection and they go finance a bunch of furniture at Jordan's or something, and then that hits their credit and then they can't qualify for the loan anymore. So it's like, great, don't do that. So I like to have those discussions up front. They seem silly, but if you don't, they don't know, why would they know that? You know what I mean? They would have no idea if you don't tell them. Just I always expect them to know nothing. And then if they know something, great. But I talk with them as if they know absolutely nothing about the real estate process, because most of the time they don't. And the last time they went through it, things have changed drastically. So this is the last step. It's closing time. So before closing, they do a final walkthrough on the property to ensure it's in broom swept condition and all personal property has been moved or is in the process of being moved. It also shows what repairs have been completed from the home inspection. And closing will usually take place at an attorney's office or the county's registry of deeds. Once the paperwork is signed and the deed is recorded at the registry, the home is yours. So this can be sometimes touchy lately. I don't know why. I've run into it where I've had a couple of seller clients get irked that we're not on record and the buyer is allowed to move in. But there's like kind of like gap insurance. There's paperwork that the attorneys have you sign that say, you know, covers you for that period. At that point, if there's any issue, like if the registry has an issue with something, it's usually something that just needs to be fixed on the attorney side and they resubmit for recording.
Yeah, still in the way.
It depends. So you can do, if you
Other than
close,
registered land.
if you close at the registry, you just go and they just file it right away. But a lot of times it closes at an attorney's office or here, and then they get in line virtually and they do it electronically. They
Are the
electronically
registries
file.
open now?
I don't know. I know that the registry usually now, what's big difference between now and then is that if it's the closing is here or an attorney's office, usually just here, they're fine with you going. If it's an attorney's office, sometimes they don't want you there because of COVID. And sometimes because of, at the registry, it's the same thing. They only want absolutely required parties being there. And honestly, as much as you want to be there for the walkthrough and then let them go to their closing, because it's really unnecessary for you to be there and your time could be better spent elsewhere. However, there are clients that might want you there for support. And in that case, I might go, or I'll say, you know what, FaceTime me, you know, if they're really adamant about me not being in there. There's really nothing that you can do if something hits the fit. Well, if that's not true, we'll talk about that in negotiating tomorrow. I've had some closing table nightmares that I was glad I was at. But either way, if there's a problem at the closing table, whether you're there or not, you're going to hear from people. But that's really it. That's it. Do you guys got any questions? I know I just hit you with a lot of stuff. This is just basically, again, I want to reiterate that this is something I'm showing to buyers. So you want to have something similar put together because there are plenty of agents that aren't taking the time to put something like this together. It sets you aside, sets you apart. If you're doing stuff like this, maybe you run it quarterly, every 12 weeks on Zoom. You don't need to be in here to do it. Do it on Zoom. Way more people are likely to attend on Zoom, to be completely honest. I mean, if they don't have to leave their home and they can view it, you're going to get a lot more, you know, stuff. I might even do like if you join, I'll enter you into a raffle and give them a gift card, something like that. So that it just small things to keep you top of mind in real estate. I recommend building one of these and running it every 12 weeks, building out your affiliate network. Matt is a brand new lender. He's looking for buddies. So he'd be more than happy to do a buyer presentation with you. And that's that. Thank you guys for coming to my TED Talk.
Come to meetings.
Oh, wait, hang on. How do I end this?